Fellow producers and mix engineers, come closer as we go in deep and geek. Hi guys, and welcome to Geek Talk, where we delve deep and geek into pianos, keyboards, synthesizers and music production. And today's video is called 15 Tips to a Better Mix. So these tips are relevant to you if you're experienced or if you're inexperienced and new to the game. And understand that a lot of the tips you will hear from me here today, you've probably heard them before, but I would ask you to listen to my reasons. Very often I hear information that I've heard before, but then just listening to the creator give their explanation, very often I can learn something new. So that is my hope, that a lot of the information today, even though you've heard it, you will hopefully gain a new perspective. As our good friend Martin Gore said in a song once, "When you think you've tried every road, every avenue, take one more look at what you found old, and in it you'll find something new." Early morning voice. Once I've revealed my 15 steps, do stick around, because at the end of this video I'm going to have 2 bonus tips from the great Dave Pensado. So let's jump right into it. Tip number 1. Make your initial decisions fast and trust your gut. Guys, you must remember that when it comes to mixing, it is very important to spend time on the actual balance. And when I talk about the balance, it's the actual mix. Now, this would be the balance would be the relation between all the separate instruments. Let's say you've got a mix that has got 20 different tracks. So the relation between those 20 parts is what is 80% of the mix. And this is before you put EQ and compression and panning. You should spend a lot of time on getting that mix, because once the balance between all the individual parts is right, once you add all the EQ, compression, delays and all the other bits of fairy dust, it's going to work. So you need to spend time in getting the relation right between the instruments. But now, why did I say make your initial decisions fast and trust your gut? What I mean by that is, despite the fact that the balance is important, there is this constant struggle as mix engineers, because you are a human being, where your rational mind is almost in conflict with your emotions or with your emotional mind. And we've got to remember, and this takes a lot of experience, we must remember that music is a very emotional thing, and it's once we get too technical, we're heading into dangerous waters. If we can refer back to the older days where you had an artist, a mix engineer, a producer, that's the ideal scenario, where you go into a studio, you're the artist, you concentrate on performance, and you go out, and then the producer and the mix engineer finish the record. The reason that worked really well was because the mix engineer is focusing on different aspects. These days, and it's just the way music production has evolved, very often we the artists are also mixing our stuff. Well, now, whereas that's not a problem, the problem we run into is when we lose perspective, is when we spend too much time on things. Now, this might sound contradictory where I'm saying spend time on the balance. Indeed, spend time on the balance, but what I'm saying to you is, when you start it, now let's assume you're starting a mix, all the faders are at the bottom, you've got no EQ, you've got no compression, it's just the tracks, bare and naked. Just start moving them up in a comfortable, fun way. Have your volume set at a comfortable conversation volume and start moving the faders, and you'll go, oh, there's the snare, there's the kick. Don't do what too many people do. They go in on the kick and then they tweak, and no. What? Just we're looking big picture now, guys. Just move in, move all the faders up and go, oh, there's a kick, oh, there's the snare. Oh, the snare's a bit up. Oh, there's snare. Oh, there's the voice. Yeah, bring. So you're just kind of, there's just this. You're just kind of like, oh. And what you'll find is, without thinking, and sit back and you'll go, okay, there's something we can work at. So what you're doing is, guys, you're bypassing the rational technical mind, and you're just jumping in. And what's happening is your intuition is kicking in. And this is very important. This is when you're in the flow state, when you sit there and you just move things quickly and you just get to that initial ballpark sound, because this is what you're going for. You're going for that initial ballpark feel of it. Because the problem is when you start with a kick and then you move it and then you bring in a snare and then you start EQing the snare, it becomes a nightmare because you will be constantly backwards and forwardsing and you'll drive yourself insane. And I'm telling you this from experience. Because remember guys, as humans, we've got this intuitive understanding of music, especially if you're a musician and a producer. But even if you're not a musician or a producer, this is why people who are not musicians, you can be the most unmusical person on the face of the planet, but you can still hear when someone sings out of tune or if someone, plays a wrong note on the piano. And that is because, in essence, there is something within us as human beings where we understand music. And I don't want to go too deep, guys, but you know me, how I can go off topic. So that being said, if you're a musical person, you have a more intuitive kind of feel. So when working this way, you're just getting to that initial ballpark sound very quickly, and then from there, once you got there, that's when you start doing the sort of finer tweaking. And as I say, mixing really is 80% of the mix is the balance between the individual instruments. Right guys, so I hope that makes sense. And that brings us into tip number 2, which is make your initial decisions emotionally and not technically. And this follows from step 1. And what I mean by this is, once you've got that balance and you're starting to add things like EQ and compression, sometimes you should just go with your gut and just add something on. Now, before you scream at me for saying that, understand that the biggest problem I see with young mix engineers and producers is overthinking, and your biggest enemy these days really is the fact that music technology is affordable and we've got access to so many stuff, and it's that choice leading to procrastination, leading to confusion, leading to to paralysis. So what I mean by this is when you feel the need to add a plugin or something, just jump in and throw it on. Before you've even thought of it logically, just throw it on. I know a lot of schools of thought will have problems with this, but hear my reason. It is from this sort of like emotional thinking where you act emotionally before the rational mind kicks in. My friend, this is where the magic happens, is where you make that move and you make it so quickly before you've even thought about what you've done, and you've gone, oh, okay. Now you get to the point, once you've made that move, we'll go, okay, well that didn't work. But at least you've given yourself that initial chance and let inspiration kick in. So you'll go, yeah, I'm going to put that on, and you'll, oh, I like that, yeah. And then, by acting this way, you might stumble across upon something magic, or you might just be completely, completely off. So it is my understanding that a lot of my subscribers are electronic musicians, so these tips are relative to all genres of mixing, but especially when it comes to electronic music, where you can really throw the rules of audio and physics and everything out of the window because it's electronic, and you can get as creative and off the wall as you want to. So whereas I can hear some of the traditional schools of thoughts going, don't listen to him, no, you must be technical. All I'm saying is, when you get the initial nudge to do something, just do it. Just throw it on. No harm done, you can always take it off. My whole approach to mixing is doing things in a as fast as comfortable possible way, where you just go, it's a little bit like driving a car, where you just go, sometimes you'll be driving and then someone will jump in front of you and you'll just, you'll avoid chaos, hopefully, and you'll be like, oh my God, how did I do that? Well guys, that is the subconscious mind, that is your higher self, or there is something magical. I don't want to get all spiritual, but there is something magical that governs us, and you want to tap into that magic when you're doing music. Don't let this brain dilute, because I'm going off topic now, but I have to say this is, I see so many mixes that are destroyed very often when I'm working with younger artists, and they'll send me a song to mix, and then eventually I'll be like, could you send me version 1? And they'd be like, why do you want to hear version 1? I'm like, just send me version 1. And you know something guys, 8 times out of 10, there is magic in that first version. It's because you can hear they've jumped in and they're excited, and roundabout by the time we get to version number 126, they have engineered the soul and the life out of it. So this is something I'm really going to hammer home on this GeeK Talk series, and whenever we talk about mixing, is the importance of just trusting your gut and just initially going with the emotion. So you jump in emotionally and then you go, oh, hang on, that was a bit too far. Now I'm going to use my brain, if that makes any sense. So I hope you guys are getting this. Number 3, mix in mono. An advice I can give to you, and I mix in mono all the time, and especially if you're a new mix engineer, I cannot explain to you that mixing in mono is it's like your best friend. It just helps crystallize your focus. And remember, when you're mixing in stereo, you've got front to back perspective and you've got left to right. So you've kind of got like this 360 kind of sound stage, even though it's not surround sound. You know, that's the whole thing with mixing, is you're trying to give the listener a perception of space by moving things closer, away, adding reverb to make, so you are, even though you're working stereo, you're creating a sort of three-dimensional sound space. But now, very often you'll find, as a inexperienced mix engineer, you will mix something in stereo, and then your music gets played in a club, or your music gets played on on a radio, and a lot of radio stations are still mono, and your mix falls apart and a lot of the sounds are missing. Well, this is why we mix in mono. Always assume, what is the worst way this music could be heard? Now, Dave Stewart from Eurythmics was obsessive about this back in the days of Eurythmics. Dave Stewart went on to say that he was more concerned what their music sounded like on crappy speakers, bearing in mind that most people listen to music on, tiny transistors. And if your music sounds great in the studio, that's fine, but we all know as mix engineers, it needs to translate in as many different environments as possible. So, my friend, when you mix in mono, you are eliminating this left to right part of the soundstage, and you are focusing now just on the front to back. And this is so crucial, because it really helps you to focus on the balance in between the different aspects, the different parts. Because when you've got stereo, you very often find that you might get it wrong. You might find that when it goes to mono, your kick's far too loud. And I cannot explain to you the magic of mixing in mono, and then you'll find that after a while you forget it's mono, because you've been working at it for so long, and then towards the end of the mix you go, oh, you hit the stereo and it just opens up. And I'll tell you what, my friend, this is where the magic happens, is when it sounds good in mono, it'll sound incredible in stereo. So always mix in mono for as long as you can. Mono is your friend. This brings me to tip number 4, and this is a very, very good tip. Mix on your mum's kitchen radio. Now that sounds hilarious, and I laughed when I first heard that. And I got this advice from a website called Mixed by Mozart, and a book I got from him. So coming back to what I said, Dave Stewart from Eurythmics said, is that you've got to consider how music sounds in its worst form. So that being the case, as I say, if it sounds good in the studio, if it sounds good on great speakers, it's only going to sound good in that environment. But once you move it into a car or a little speaker in a supermarket or in a shop, it may sound bad. So you always want to almost use the crappiest speaker you can, make it sound as good as it can on that crappy speaker, and then it will open up and sound good on pretty much anything. So I'm sure your mum has a radio in the kitchen, or your grandmother. You know what it's like? My mum still, she has this really crappy, she has like this crappy FM FM AM radio, the one that's standing on the kitchen sink and she's washing the dishes or she's cooking, and this radio's on in the background. I must just say for the record that my dad does more of the cooking than my mum does, yeah? So, and this goes down to the theory, and it's a fact really, that if something sounds good on a crappy speaker, it'll sound good on anything. And all of you, well, I'm sure most of you, your mums or your grandmother, usually had this old radio in the kitchen, and I know my mum even now has got this radio in the kitchen. It's always on like FM or AM, and it's always out of tune. It's always like kind of between two stations, and I always walk in and I'm like, Mum, just put the station on. It's going out of tune. Just get it back on, remain on topic. But you know what I mean, your mum or your grandmother or your grandfather, they've always got this old crappy radio that's half out of tune and it's just more static than music and sound. But if you import this into your workflow, your mixes will improve in ways that you cannot believe. Right guys, so if you look to my left over there, or to your right, you'll see I've got this little, what I like to call Mum's Kitchen Radio. In fact, it's not. It's a sort of like a modern. It's analog, but it's built by a company called Tivoli Audio. I'm not endorsing them, but they are great products, by the way. So all you really need is something like your Mum's Kitchen Radio with an auxiliary in the back. And what you want to do is, when you're mixing, is have it to the side. As you can see, it's on the side, because what you're doing then is, guys, you're listening to it in a kind of passive way. Now remember that a lot of people, when they hear your mix, they're not going to hear it sitting in between the two speakers. They're going to hear it, they're going to be off, they're going to hear it from one side, or they're going to be in a car, or they're going to be in an elevator. Well, if your music's played in an elevator, you're probably a loser. Sorry to those who do elevator music, but you get the picture, is that you want this crappy sounding speaker to the side. So when you're mixing in your studio, where you sit between your two speakers, have this Mum's Kitchen Radio somewhere off to the side. It can be anywhere in the room, but it mustn't be in front of you. It should be sort of, you know, away from you, on the side, on the back, sort of, so you're listening to it passively. So the reason this works, guys, is because remember, when we're sitting in our studios and we've taken a lot of time to balance the sound and use some, you know, acoustic treatment, we'll find the mix sounds good. But then when we listen to it on the Mum's Kitchen Radio, you might find, oh, I can't hear the cymbals, or oh, the vocal's too loud, or the bass is gone. And by mixing through your Mum's Kitchen Radio, it forces you to concentrate on the important aspects of the mix. So when you combine these steps, like my first step where I said get to the initial mix quickly, and then switch over to the Mum's Kitchen Radio and start listening to it, because you'll be sitting here behind your door and your Mum's Kitchen Radio will be on the side. And what you're doing is, because you're listening to it and it's so far off, you are fundamentally focused on the most important things. You're going, can I hear the kick? Can I hear the snare? Can I hear the vocals? And it makes you concentrate on the mix as a whole, so you're not, you know, honing in on details. Because remember, as I keep saying, is music is meant to be heard as a whole, and as producers we get so caught up on the technicalities of the individual parts, we lose perspective of the whole. And remember, people are listening to it as a whole, and whether you like it or not, music will always be listened to as a whole. So the beauty of the Mum's Kitchen Radio is it sounds crap, it's mono, but if you get it to sound good in your Mum's Kitchen Radio, it'll sound good pretty much anywhere. And Mixed by Mozart, in that book, he goes on to say that you want to spend, I think, about 60% of the time mixing on your Mum's Kitchen Radio. So you want to keep going back to it and listening to it, and then mix most of the time, and then just do the final tweaks on your sort of studio monitors. And remember, guys, all mix engineers work in different ways. These are just tips that work for me, and I'm hoping you will gain some value from them yourself. What also helps with your Mum's Kitchen Radio is when you play back reference tracks, and we'll get back to reference tracks in a while, is you can kind of hear with the reference track playing, and when you bring yours in, it makes it very easy to tell if there's too much bass or treble, or if it's too boomy. It just helps. So you are now going to be seeing your Mum's Kitchen Radio or your grandmother's kitchen radio in a completely different way. Don't knock it till you've tried it. This brings me to step 5, which is work on the most important elements first. As producers, we're perfectionists, and we want to get everything perfect. Therefore, we jump into the tiniest little sounds and we zero in on them. But this brings it back to the Mum's Kitchen Radio, is when you monitor and mix through your Mum's Kitchen Radio, you are listening to what the most important things are. So focus on the most important things first, and then all the other elements should fall into place. Tip number 6, use a high pass filter or a low cut. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I think you guys all know about this. Is always make sure that instruments that don't require too much low-end energy, just make sure that they're not clashing with the bass and the kick and the lower elements. Having said that, you must always be careful not to roll off too much bass, because a lot of the energy in a sound can be in the sort of like the lower mids, in the sort of muddy area. So it's always a fine art sort of tweaking. So just be mindful of this is that you don't want to go mad and high pass or low cut everything, but you just want to be aware of the fact that you're not making the bottom end too muddy. Use volume automation throughout the song. Now, if ever you were to look at a mix that was done by a top mix engineer, you would notice a lot of movement on the faders. And this is the difference between a pro mix and an amateur mix, is that there's a lot of volume adjustment constantly throughout the song. You might get to and it can be microscopic movements. Remember guys, this is a step that you always do at the end. The automation and the volume automation is always done right at the end. For instance, when you get to a bridge and there's maybe a guitar solo, there might just be a part where a note is just nudged up and then brought down immediately, and then we might get to another part of the song where the bass, you just feel there's a bit of a whoop, and you bump it up, and at that exact part you might bring something else down. A mix should always be moving and dynamic. So never see a fader as something that is set and stuck. Things are always moving, and of course it's genre specific. I suppose if it's EDM and dance music, things like the kick and the snare would remain there. But I mean, you've got to use your discretion and your creativity as as an artist here. But yeah, volume automation is very, very important. Tip number 8: mix at conversation level. Now, if you're familiar with the Fletcher Munson Curve, and this is something that we can go really geeky in, I'm going to leave a link to the description below. And in layman's terms, what that really means is, it means that music's perceived volume will change depending on how loud we listen to it. So when you listen to music really loud, there are certain frequencies that come out. When we listen to it really softly, there are other frequencies that become more sort of prevalent. And it's been found through a lot of research and best practice that the best way to mix music is at conversation level. And that would mean the conversation level that I'm having with you now. So if you're having a mix, if you've got a mix up there, you should technically be able to talk to someone in the room and not be able to raise your voice. And that is, but of course, me being a geek, I want to know what exactly is that level, and I'm going to tell you now. So 85 decibels is kind of like the recommended sort of conversation level, but then there's also another measurement which is 70 decibels for smaller rooms, and I personally always mix at approximately 70 decibels, and I've got a nice geeky way for you to measure this if you really are interested. Guys, you can just download yourself an app. Here's one I downloaded from the App Store. This one's called Decibel X. I don't know if I'm going to be able to zoom this in for you. Yeah. So this is and you don't need to get anything expensive. I mean, I know some people who use sort of like hardware analog decibel meters. Now, once again, guys, you don't want to get too sort of like geeky about this, but download yourself a decibel meter. So in my case, what I do is I sit at my mixing position and I will open the decibel meter and I will hold my phone to measure the decibels. I will hold my phone where my head is going to be. And then I just adjust my volume just so that the decibel meter is measuring at about 70 dB. It'll fluctuate between maybe 65, 82, but you just want to get it in the ballpark of about 70. And that's the volume where you want to set it at. And you want to get your ears used to monitoring at that level. Because at that conversation level, which is between 70 decibels and 85 decibels, at that level, this is the ideal curve where music sounds its most balanced. I know music's not exciting when it's not played loud, and I think this is a mistake we all make as younger producers. We get excited and we turn things up, and of course the problem is when we listen to it back in a club or wherever, it just sounds crap. So the irony is, if you want something to sound big, you've got to listen to it really, really quietly. So the best way is to monitor at conversation level at volumes between 70 and 85 decibels, because at that level, all the frequencies will come across balanced. The bass won't be too much, the treble won't stand out. So get used to monitoring at this level and it will change your mixes. Tip number 9, use your ears and not your eyes. And guys, this is a huge problem these days, is with all the technology we have. Although mixing on a computer screen has brought such advantages to the game, it has also made us a little bit dependent on what we see. and we tend not to listen, and that is a huge problem. If I think back to my first album I made in 1997 using an MC50 Mark II composer, I do remember those days having a lot more fun because I was a lot younger, but I wasn't really obsessed. I was just like, I'm going to get this out and bang, 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 and I had so much fun. And as much as I love music now, I just can't remember enjoying it as much as I did then. And a lot of that was down to the fact that I didn't have that much technology. I had the technology I had, and I had to make it work. I didn't have limitless tracks and, you know, VSTs and plugins. So although the tools we have today are very useful, they do help us address problems, especially a lot of guys these days who are mixing in smaller environments and you don't have a sub bass. You know, it is very good to use visual tools to sort of help you find the bottom end, make sure your bottom end's not distorting too much and things like that. But I do find there is this, especially these days, and I'm guilty as well, we tend to mix but we're staring at the screen. You almost need to turn the screen around and just really listen, because I think we've forgotten how to listen. Once again, don't get obsessed about this, but just be aware that you need to listen. Are you listening? It's like that saying I heard. There's a compressor manufacturer called GeeK, and their slogan or their motto was, if it sounds right, it's right. And I want you to say that to yourself. If it sounds right, it's right. If you're looking at the screen and the screen tells you something, I'm going to tell you, trust your ears, because that is the way music is consumed. Trust your ears, trust your gut. If it sounds right, it's right. Tip number 10, use reference tracks. I'm very surprised with all the information flying around today that when I'm working with younger producers, the first question, if they're struggling, I'll say, did you use a reference track? And they'll be like, no. But I'm like, guys, use reference tracks. I want to do a video later on where I show you how I use reference tracks to get volumes and how to help you mix. There's just no reason not to do it. And on the tip of using reference tracks, be very careful. Always use at least 3 reference tracks. And remember, with a reference track, you're not trying to copy it. You're just trying to make sure that it is in the right ballpark. So if you're doing EDM, import 3 EDM reference tracks from different mixes that you like. And the reason I say use 3 is because if you use 1, even if you're conscious of it, you will subconsciously start trying to copy it. And with a reference mix, you do not want to emulate it. It's all about ballpark. That is why I always say, when you use reference mixes, always use at least 3, and then flip between yours and the other 3 mixes interchangeably. Don't focus too much on one reference mix, otherwise you will start copying it. Ask yourself this question: does it have the same clarity? Does it have the same emotion? And this is a subject we can delve into very deeply. So just coming back to that, always use reference tracks. So if you're working on rock music, have 3 rock music reference tracks and alternate between the 3 all the time, so that you're not focused in on too much on one, because if you focus too much on one, you're going to end up copying it. Tip number 11, listen on various systems. Guys, if you've got a car, listening in a car is one of the best ways to listen to one of your mixes. If you don't, as I say, the best thing you can do is not only listening on your door, Mum's Kitchen Radio. I'm going to insist that you all get a Mum's Kitchen Radio. That is, God, I should start a business selling Mum's Kitchen radios, but I cannot tell you how your mixes will improve. So listen to it on as many different systems as you can. But the take-home advice is to listen on as many different systems as possible. Your Mum's Kitchen Radio, your DAW, earphone buds, different types of headphones, and just get an idea of how it sounds across the board. Tip number 12, listen from another room. I remember a guru friend of mine who was mentoring me back in the day. I was on the phone to him and he said, "Oh, Vaughan, how's that mix going?" And I said, "Oh, it's there. I just can't get the vocal to sit right." I said, "I'm happy with the sound of the track, but I just feel the vocals, I can't get the vocal to fit, so I don't know if it needs more EQing, or I don't know if it's just volume." Sometimes that's difficult to judge. But then again, if you use mono and your Mum's Kitchen Radio, it can be a lot easier. But sometimes you can struggle with a vocal, and or not only a vocal, it could be an instrumental track, and you're listening to it and you're going, "I don't know if it needs EQ or if it just needs volume." Well, here's a golden trick, my friend. Listen from another room. walk out the studio, go stand in another room, whether you've got a kitchen outside or, just stand outside the studio door, and then listen to it passively. And this is where, once again, the mum's kitchen radio comes into handy. Listening from another room. Now, a lot of mix engineers know about this trick, but no one can actually explain why it is that when you stand in another room, you can actually hear whether the vocal is too loud or not. And that just try that. If you're struggling with a part, or especially with a vocal, go stand in another room and just listen back to it, and you'll be like, oh, it's too loud. And then you tweak it, go stand back again in the other room, and you go, oh, that sounds about right. And then it works like magic. So yeah, listen back from another room or outside the studio door. Tip number 13, know your room and keep your volume set at the same level. It's important to understand your listening environment and understand the room, and few of us have perfect listening environments these days. I mean, it can cost thousands to kit your studio out to be a perfect listening environment. However, there are a lot of top mix engineers that are doing, world-class mixes on headphones, and also mixing in environments that aren't perfect, but because they understand the room and the speaker, they can often beat people who are mixing in the perfect environment. So my advice to you is to know your room, and the best thing you can do for this, guys, is to have your volume on your speakers, have it set at a constant level. If you've got a separate room where you listen to music and it's in another room of the house, that's fine. Listen to music as loud as you want. That doesn't matter. But I'm talking about in your studio. Always have the volume set to the same level, because your perception and the way you hear it is important, and it will help you when you do your mix, because you're used to, when you're sitting there, there's a certain like feeling of the air pressure that comes from the speakers and everything, which you probably won't feel that much if you're mixing conversation level, but there is a feeling that comes from a speaker when it's at a certain volume. So whatever that volume you choose, and I urge you to always choose conversation level, somewhere between 70 and 85 decibels. Set your speakers at that, and always check before you do a mix that you're more or less in that ballpark, and get used to listening to music at that volume, because when you do, my friend, your mixes are going to improve tenfold. I promise you that. Tip number 14 is an obvious one, but people don't do it, and I don't do it, but we should, and that is take breaks to prevent ear fatigue and loss of perspective. The worst thing you can do, guys, is to just spend too much time on a mix, because in one sitting, because you just lose that perspective. And you'll very often, how often have you sat for hours in a mix, gone to bed and woken up the next morning with fresh ears and gone, oh my God, it sounds like crap, because you've spent too much time on it. And it is an experience thing, guys, because as I say, with mixing, you are a little bit against the clock, because you are trying to go as fast as you can without losing perspective and without rushing it. So on that, I just want to say, guys, you're not going to be a great mix engineer overnight. Even guys like Dave Pensado, who are world class, he always says he's still learning, and he's humble, and he takes advice, and this is a learning process, and you are only going to get better by doing it over and over and over again. And you're lucky, because of technology today, it is a lot easier, but there is no substitute for putting in the work. Finally, tip number 15, might sound a bit cheesy, but love the process and remember why you're doing it. Because coming back to when I spoke about when I made my first album many years ago, it was just so much fun. And indeed, I have fun in the studio now. I've learned how to have fun again, because, up until a few years ago, and this all comes from experience, you can become so obsessed by things that you can almost lose sleep, and it's just not necessary, guys. Remember why you got into music in the first place. So love what you did. You have to love it. You really need to. Right, guys, and this brings us to the end of a rather longer video than I was thinking, but me, I always like to explain things as best I can, and it's very important to me that you understand what I'm saying. Now, I want to unveil those 2 golden tips from the brilliant mix engineer, Dave Pensado. And you can learn a lot from Dave Pensado. I would recommend that you go to his YouTube channel. I think it's called Pensado's Lair. Right, so his golden tips are: it is better to sound new than to sound good. Think about that. It's better to sound new than to sound good. that doesn't mean it's okay to sound bad, but what you must understand is, as a mix engineer, people are paying you or employing you to bring something new to the mix, to add something to it. And therefore, this tip is very much, it's more of a mindset kind of tip. It's teaching you to focus on, to think about it in a different way. I'm going to also lead you on to his next, and this to me is the tip of all tips. I mean, if you don't take anything from this video, take this tip. You are mixing to show your taste, not your skill. I'll say it again. You are mixing to show your taste, not your skill. And this was groundbreaking and revolutionary to me. If you meditate on it and think about it, you are mixing to show your taste, not your skill. That will just release you from from your prison and your boundaries, because you must remember, guys, every mix engineer is hired because of their sound. The skill will come through the committing to wanting to do it every day and wanting to be best in your field. That will come. But too often we get despondent when we listen to reference mixes and we try and we become despondent. We go, oh, I can't beat it, because you're trying to emulate something. And what's brilliant about this Pensado tip is you are mixing to show your taste, not your skill. You are demonstrating what you find appealing in a song. So if I get sent a song to mix and you get a song, someone sends you a song to mix, let's assume you're on the same level of experience that I am. They're going to be different, and someone's going to like your mix more and some people are going to like my mix more. Now that just depends on our taste and our personality, and you know, you as a mix engineer, you might like very wide mixes. I'm thinking of, my brain always goes to Depeche Mode. I'm thinking of the Ben Hillier Depeche Mode albums, which some of you don't like. I notice his mix style, it's very wide, it's very, you know, the sound, he goes for a very, very sort of like a wide sound spectrum. And then if I contrast that with Gareth Jones's mixing of the sort of earlier Depeche Mode albums, it has a different sound, and of course they would. But really, really think about this. I want you to write this down and just think about it. You are mixing to show your taste and not your skill, and that will really set you free, because it'll make you feel that, hang on, this is the way I do it. And at the end of the day, my friend, that is where the power is because you are mixing to show your taste, and through the repetition of this, the skill will come. You've just got to meditate on this, guys, and trust me, you are mixing to show your taste, not your skill. This is profound. It really, really is. Right, guys, and that concludes a rather long video. But as I say, whenever you jump into this channel, you know what you're going to get, or you don't. I'd like you to please click the thumbs up button and leave a comment. Leave a comment. Let me know anything that you want to elaborate in this video. Please, I learn a lot from you guys. So, what was the most interesting tip in this list? Do you agree with it? Is there something you'd like to add to this? What do you feel about your mum's kitchen radio? You know, tell me which tip you thought was the most useful in this. Also, if you're brand new to this channel, I'd like to invite you on board by clicking the subscribe button. Guys, there is also the Facebook page, which is really kicking at the moment. I'll put the link below. Please click onto it, request to join, and either I or one of my admins will allow you to join. We're having a lot of fun on that Facebook page and on this channel, and as I say, if you're new, I'd like to invite you to the family. And guys, to my regular subscribers, I love you loads, and I will see you on the next video. All the best.